Good morning. This is the Blaine's World webcast that can be found each week on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, you name it, you can find us. You can also find us at my website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. You can find information about this show, past shows as well. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week we focus on different organizations, people in Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Ronald Rand, who's an author, publisher, and actor. And Ronald, you can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this.
Well, it's a pleasure. Hello there, Blaine. So nice
Okay.
of you to have me on the show.
Well, my pleasure. Ronald Rand is the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of The Soul of the American Actor, a theater arts quarterly newspaper. He's also a celebrated international director, artist, and author and actor. He's also, you just told me off there, now you're a painter as well.
Yes.
Okay, something else to add to what you do. For over 2 decades, he continues to perform in his internationally celebrated solo play, I Let It Be Act. It
Let
is
it be art.
received, I'm sorry, Let It Be, or it was typo there. It has received 3 critically acclaimed runs off-Broadway at the Century Center of the Performing Arts, the ArcLight Theater, and San Studio, Schubert Theater. Is that Shurin Theater in New York City? And I understand we're going to be in luck. You're going to be performing it in this area as well?
Yes, I've just been invited by John Hall and the Black Mountain Center of the Performing Arts to bring it here on April 25th, a Friday night in next year, and which I'm very excited about. It'll actually be the 25th year anniversary of my touring in the show around the world. I've been to 5 continents and 26 countries. And next month, I'm taking the show on the road again. I'll be taking it back to Athens, to Greece for the 4th time. And I've been invited to perform it in the International WAAE Education Summit in Athens. And
you said I was
yeah.
disappointed. It's going next year, but it's actually not that far off. So it's going to be in this coming April. It's going to be in this
This
area.
coming April, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
So let me ask you this first question, Ronald. I typically ask when I meet somebody for the first time. As a kid, you grew up where?
I actually was born I grew up in South Florida, in Coral Gables, Florida.
As a
And
kid growing up in Florida, did you always know you wanted to be this actor, writer, performer, bon vivant? You know, it seems you do a couple of different things simultaneously. How do you get into all these different things?
Well, I did. It's surprising because I started out, probably my mother, since she was such a talented art teacher and painter, she put a paintbrush in my hand when I was about 1 or 2. And my father was always dreaming of being an actor, even though he became a professional tennis player and a lawyer. He sort of pushed me. So they actually got me into a woman who she had an acting school in her house with a stage, and I was 5 years old. And I started taking Shakespeare improvisations and things like that. And I joined a professional children's theater. And by the time I left for NYU to study with Stella Adler, I must have done about 200 or 300 professional children's shows over the years, and lots of other things.
Do you remember
So
the
I
first?
knew.
Do you remember the first show you ever did?
Actually, I think it was The Wizard of Oz, and I played a tree.
Okay, and you played. I bet you played it very well. No.
I did. I was very excited. I think I probably was a mixture of nervousness and excitement, so the tree shook a lot.
Is that true though? You were a tree in Wizard of Oz?
I was a tree the first time. Over the years, as I progressed, I played so many different parts. I think I played the Scarecrow. I played the Cowardly Lion. It's very interesting, and over the years, of course, you do lots of different things. I even growing up there went to Miami Beach and did some stand-up routines in some of the nightclubs. In those days, those were the old days of the different hotels like the
Right.
Deauville
Yeah,
that
sure.
are all not around anymore. So one of the things I would do is I did a lot of impressions. And I not only did it there, I did it in high school as well. But you see, one of my best ones, of course, you remember, well, you see, Harvey is standing right behind me, and he's a 6-foot white puka. So you
Yeah.
know who he is.
Did you ever play Harvey? Did you ever do the show?
I did the show Harvey in high school as well. So I played Elwood P. Dowd.
You
I
did,
sure did.
but
Yeah.
you weren't the rabbit though.
No, no, the rabbit was actually in a painting up on the wall,
Right,
and
that's
the
right.
rabbit actually appeared, of course,
I remember
naturally to
at the
me.
very yeah. No,
Yes.
the version I saw they did in Asheville a couple of years ago. The rabbit I
Uh-huh.
think appeared or the curtain call or something at the very end. It was kind of fun. You
Oh,
saw the
that's cute. Yes. Yeah,
rabbit.
they do it in lots of different ways.
Well, it's
Yeah.
funny because you mentioned that particular show. The impression works for me. I guess it doesn't work for a lot of other. It's an age thing, I guess. So
It
James,
can be, but then one of the other ones I did is Richard Nixon. Now let me make it perfectly clear. I am not a crook. So I did Nixon a lot, and I actually covered myself with tapes and wore a black suit.
I love
And
it.
it was fun. You do these things, and it's just fun.
By the
But
way, that was a good impression. I got
oh,
it. So, but I
well,
guess unfortunately you don't have much of a call to do Richard Nixon anymore.
well, not necessarily, but you never can tell. I've been asked to audition a couple of times to be Nixon, because I've also appeared in hundreds of TV shows and movies over the years in New York City. It's partly how I made my living and doing shows off Broadway at night. And one time I was, they had a call, an audition for Richard Nixon for a film called Rude Awakening. It was going to
Okay,
be starring opposite Eric Roberts and Cheech and Chong.
right.
And, I had a very strong feeling that I had a shot at it, even though when I went to the audition, there were a lot of much, much older Richard Nixons there. I went in there and I decided that I was Richard Nixon. And when I walked out, they had this look on their face of disbelief. And 2 weeks later, I did get the call, and I had gotten cast as Richard Nixon. What I didn't know is that in the film, they wanted Richard Nixon at the end of his life. And I had actually seen him on the Upper East Side just a few weeks before. And, he was very, in his 80s, very old and very slow. But that's what they wanted. So I sat in the makeup chair for almost 5 hours by an Oscar nominated makeup artist who turned me into an 85-year-old Richard Nixon.
So
And
were you in the movie?
I was in the movie. I had this wonderful scene. I was on the set for 2 weeks, and it was great. And we had so much fun. But then, of course, the old Hollywood story. Sometimes your scenes end up on the cutting room floor.
Right.
So I went to the film premiere, and naturally, it was one of those films where that happened. They
Oh,
changed the ending of the movie.
I wrote it down. I was going to look to see the movie, but I
Yeah,
won't see you
that
in it.
film I didn't end up in, but I've had parts with Sean Connery in Family Business, with Tom Cruise in Vanilla Sky, with Christopher Plummer in O'Keefe and Stieglitz with Jane Alexander. Even I tell you a very funny story. I was called up in the middle of the night. They said we want you to play this part. The director had picture. I got to the set, and they said, okay, what you're going to do, and they really didn't tell me what the film was about. They said, you're going to walk down the street, there's going to be a homeless person, and you're going to hand them a bill. That's your action. I said, okay, if that's what you want. So the first AD set me where I'm supposed to stand. Director says action. I start walking down the street. It's a very dark street. It's about, of course, 3 or 4 in the morning because a lot of movies are shot at that
Sure.
time. I find the person who's really covered very dark. The lighting is very dark. Covered with lots of things around her, and I try to give her $1. And so I try, and she shakes her head, and I try again, and I say, "Okay, if you don't want $1," and I walk on. I didn't realize, she would say no. So when I get there to the end of the shot, I think to myself, "Wait a second, that was Yoko Ono."
Oh. Was it?
It was. And that was the movie called Homeless that she did. And it's a very sort of very famous film that she made, which was only shown in Japan, and it was in Japanese.
Oh.
And so you never know what you're going to be doing in films and television.
But that one, didn't wind up on the floor, right? That actually
No,
isn't.
that one wound up in Japan, all over Japan, and it's seen by a lot of people because it's Yoko Ono. But
Hey,
it's been amazing. I mean, I also did a lot of uh, under fives and roles on soap shows as well, like Another World and As the World Turns, and it's. I mean, I've gone through many different phases of my career, doing many different things, and that's been the joy.
I was going to ask you that, and we were talking off the air about some of the other things you've done. Out of all the
Sure.
things you've done, and we'll get to hopefully some of them, the writing, the acting, the et cetera, and so forth. Do you have a favorite thing?
Well, it's what I do now. I actually have been touring for 24 years in Let It Be Art. I bring to life the elder statesman of the American theater, Harold Clurman, who was the co-founder with Lee Strasberg and Cheryl Crawford of the famous group theater of the 1930s, which has been called significantly America's greatest acting company because it influenced all acting companies since then and changed the face of American acting and film acting because of the style of acting. They became known as famous as the Moscow Art Theater because of what they did. And also, Harold Clurman was, you might say, the most passionate human being you could ever meet in your life. And that's what happens when audiences all over the world, and I've been to 26 countries, I've crisscrossed India 5 times from top to bottom. I've actually performed been representing the United States in the Theater Olympics in India. And it's been amazing because the moment they meet Clurman, because he's such a great storyteller and he's very funny and they has such great common sense, they instantly fall in love with him. And it doesn't matter whether I'm in Kathmandu or Bangkok or I'm in Thailand or I'm down in Colombia. They instantly like this incredibly passionate human being.
By the way, so
So,
I don't miss this again. Could you repeat the
yes,
date when that's going to be in the area?
April 25th, Friday night at the Black Mountain Center of the Performing Arts.
Okay. And so it's a one-man show where you're going to be telling his stories?
Well, Harold Clurman, not only, let me tell you how he sort of comes alive. I don't act him as a character
Right.
because I also teach an art of transformation workshop, and I bring him to life as a human being. And when I'm in what I call the creation room, because I don't consider it a dressing room, it's where creation begins. During the 3 hour transformation I go through in the creation room, and I lay out all of his clothing for Harold Clurman to come. And actually, during the time when I'm putting on my makeup, because he's almost 80 years old, but he's so vibrant, you would never know that. Um, Sometime, and I never know when, he literally arrives in the creation room and enters me. And my whole body changes, everything changes, my cells, the way everything. And so when I stand up, it's not it's Harold Clurman, and he gets dressed and he leaves the creation room and he doesn't go on stage. He actually goes into his apartment to live. And so you actually meet, for want of a better phrase, you meet Harold Clurman. And he's talking to his students, but of course, the audience becomes the students. And when he leaves his apartment and goes to the theater, where he's going in the evening, I return. And it has happened hundreds of times. And it's the transformation that I go through that I learned by studying with Stella Adler, who I consider the greatest acting teacher we've ever had in this country. I was with her for almost 6 years. And then I also studied with Harold Clurman and also with the great Polish director Jerzy Grotowski, who also believed in immersion and transformation. So I've been very fortunate.
And just listening to you, and I love your passion for this too. You have me excited now in this. So I already jotted down that, April 25th in Black Mountain, we can meet not only you, but we can meet this other person,
Well,
so
you'll actually meet Harold Clurman.
which,
Yes, you will. Yes, that's the joy of the performance. But in the show, you also meet Stella Adler and Stanislavski and Lee Strasberg and even Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis as well. So you
okay.
meet a lot of people in the performance.
And will they sign autographs as well?
Well, we'll have to ask.
Okay, fine. So, well, let's kind of fast forward from there. So that's something to look forward to in April. We'll get to meet you for the first time on stage. hopefully we'll
Uh,
meet you beforehand.
sure.
We were kidding off the air. In your spare time, you do just a few other things, and it's just overwhelming what else you do. But let's talk about some of them individually. You also have what is it, a newsletter you call it?
A newspaper. Yeah,
Newspaper.
I was the founder and publisher and the editor in chief of the Soul of the American Actor newspaper. It's the only newspaper in the country about the art and craft of the actor and the art of the theater and all the arts. I started it 26 years ago. Al Hirschfeld, who became a very
Sure.
close and dear friend, he became the artist of the newspaper,
Wow.
and he gave me permission to have probably I had maybe close to 500 or 600 Hirschfelds in the newspaper over the years. And I've done close to 2,000 interviews that have appeared and essays. Arthur Miller gave me permission to include some of his writing, Gloria Steinem. So many incredible people have contributed their essays to the paper, but then I, of course, have done interviews with people like Kevin Kline and Angelica Houston and Edward Albee. I mean, it's an enormous list of incredible artists, but I've also covered dance, incredible people like Jacques D'Amboise and Catherine Dunham. And the other thing is that I took some of those interviews and I put them in this book called Create. And it includes 130 of some of the interviews that were in the paper, but then I did some new ones like Carol Burnett and Shaka Khan and people like that. But then I also not only have people in the arts, I have educators like Patch Adams.
Okay, sure.
So I've tried to encompass a lot of extraordinary people, poets, mime artists, dancers, singers, composers. So out of the soul of the American actor, people, when you go to my website, soulamericanactor.com, you will actually meet also international artists from around the world as well. Because on my travels to 26 countries, I continually interview people, in different walks of life. I actually met North Carolina's poet laureate, uh, Jackie, and so I'm going to interview her as well for my newspaper.
So now back to the newspaper. So if folks want to read the newsletter or get it, they can subscribe to it or see it online.
Yes, you can subscribe to it. You can contact me at my email, which is Mr. Ronald Rand at gmail.com, Mr. Ronald Rand, and just say I'd like to get a subscription and I'll be in touch. And then you can find the newspaper, and there's information there at Soul, AmericanActor.com.
Okay. And you were mentioning to me off the air that right now you have all these issues you've had, and it's going to be resuming again. You mentioned,
Yes, well, the current issue is online at because it's probably close to 60 or 70 pages, all in color. And I did a printed issue, which actually started the newspaper back in 1998. And because I've moved now, I've only been in Asheville a couple of months. I'm going to restart the newspaper here with a new printer and everything. So, we'll be having a new issue coming out, a print issue.
and what's very exciting about what you just said is the fact that I can actually read a newspaper. In other words,
Yes.
as a kid, I was a newspaper junkie. I love newspapers, but
Uh-huh.
you see, even the Asheville, we won't mention the name of the paper, but it used to be like a 48 page, paper, and now it's like 12 pages or something.
Hmm.
People don't
Yes.
read print newspapers anymore. Uh,
The
but this,
world has changed. Yeah.
but this they can read a print newspaper.
Yes, yes. I send it to people all over the country and around the world. And I actually hand it out to people when I do my show, when I go to universities. I'm also a visiting guest professor. I was an adjunct professor at Northern Illinois University, at Pace University, and at the University of North Alabama. And as a visiting guest professor, I've taught at close to 50 universities and colleges in 26 countries and 20 states across America. And I'm also a Fulbright specialist. What I was chosen by the Fulbright program, and I have received 4 Fulbright awards. I've been chosen twice for 2 5-year tenures, and I have been very fortunate to spend 6 weeks in Bosnia and Herzegovina at the University of Sarajevo, to teach at the University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur, and down in Uruguay. I also taught in Paysandú at the Paysandú Theater School. And I just came back from Greece. I was there in April and May. I was teaching at the University of Patras, and it was the first time. And each of those places I've been the first Fulbright specialist, visiting guest professor, meaning the Fulbright program offers that you can become a Fulbright scholar, meaning a student who
Right.
goes to universities or comes to America to study, or they choose 75 out of 3,000 university professors in America. And if you get chosen, you have the opportunity to apply to get a Fulbright, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll get one. There has to be a real impetus from the university to want you to come, and you have to be incredibly have something special to offer. Well, I've been very blessed that way.
Well, one of the things I'm hoping to do when I come to your one-man show, or not
Sure.
your one-man show, the one-man show of all these other people as well, is will you also teach me how you do all this without any sleep? I'm just listening to you. No, I have two questions to ask you in all seriousness.
Yes.
Like, do you sleep a lot or you don't sleep a
Well,
lot?
sleep is really overrated. I mean, I mean, a lot of people have trained themselves to sleep a couple of hours a day.
Right.
I probably sleep about six,
Yeah.
and I'm up very, very early in the morning, and I paint every day. I'm also a plein air painter, so I joined the Plein Air Painters of Asheville. I'm also joining the Hendersonville Plein Air Painters, and I love it because that's why I came here. I've only been here 3 months, and I just love the Blue Ridge Parkway. I love all of the galleries. I love all the people that I've met here so far. I've made so many friends. I've also been going to the Center for Spiritual Living, Asheville. It's been wonderful because it's all about life affirmations. And it's just been a joy meeting so many people.
Well, other thing I was going to ask you too, I don't know if you'll teach it as well, but behind you, I don't see your roller skates, because I'm wondering how you get to do all this stuff.
Well, I also put my wings in the corner. So
Okay.
that makes it simple to get
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. Or yeah, just incredible what you do. But let's go back to the book then. So you showed the one book, but you've now
Yes.
written three books. Talk about
Yes. Well,
the latest one, if you would.
this is the latest one. It's called Solo Transformation on Stage. It has a foreword by Stephen Lang, who's
Okay,
known as the
sure.
bad guy in Avatar. He's a very dear, close friend of mine. And it's called also A Journey into the Organic Process of the Art of Transformation, which is what I teach in my workshop. My workshops are really about the joy of living and creativity. And that's the most beautiful thing that we have the gift of imagination inside of us, and we can become whatever we want to do, whatever we want to become in life. And it's what I believe in and what I teach. The other great thing about the book is that it's not only a book about making your dreams come true, and if you've ever thought about creating your own solo show, this is a great book for you, but it also has 20 interviews in the book that I've included, from extraordinary artists who have decided to create their own solo show or be in a solo show. People like Christopher Plummer, Olympia Dukakis, Ben Vereen, Eve Ensler, Billy Crudup, Stephen Lang, of course, Lawrence Luckinbill, Angelica Page, um, Adrienne Barbeau, Tony Lobianco, Lawrence Luckinbill. One of the things that I believe in is that we really learn so much from others. And there's so many great insights in this book, that will allow you to delve into what is it that makes you tick and what is it that would make a story tick that you want to tell. It's got to be so passionate and so filled with energetic life streaming from your soul. That's what I teach.
Now, in terms of acting, do you have a preference then in terms of a one-man show or being with others?
Well, I've done a lot of shows with others, and I love being around people. One of the joys that I've discovered is, of course, people say to me, "God, how can you keep doing the same show for 24 years? You must, how can you say the same words?" But no show is ever the same. I can do a show in what's called the Cave Theater, which is an actual cave in Tbilisi, Georgia, or I can end up doing a show for 200 Zimbabweans in a tribal hut in Harare, Zimbabwe. Believe you me, the shows will be completely different. The audience will react totally different. And I never know, to tell you the truth, whether Harold Clurman is going to say what is written in what we call the play, because he is living out there and I'm inside. And I'm hoping that he will say what's got to come to life, but I never know.
It's funny you say that because I kid a lot of actors, Ronald, especially who do
Uh,
one-person shows. Is the
yes,
beauty of doing one-person show is that if you can screw up a line, it doesn't matter because you're the only one who knows, aside from the director, you know.
yes,
Whereas in a big show, you're dependent on other people.
that's right. Yes.
So you mentioned two of the books. You have a third book you were telling me off the air was what?
Yes, this third book that I've written is called Acting Teachers of America. It has 100 interviews with it. It has 50 interviews with actors who teach acting, directors who teach acting, and acting teachers, some of the most influential that have taught. For example, you have a director like Lloyd Richards, who did August Wilson's original plays, and he was a very famous acting teacher. One of his students, as it turns out, I asked all the acting teachers in the book, whether they were actors or directors, did your students really learn something? So what did Lloyd Richards say? Well, listen, why don't you call up Sydney? I said, Sydney, huh? And he said, yeah, call up Sydney Poitier and see if he learned something. And so I did. And I had a wonderful conversation
And
with
did
Sydney.
did you say you learned something?
Oh, he certainly did. And he certainly talked, up the wazoo about Lloyd, how much he loved him and what an effect. Because when he came to New York, he could barely speak
Right, I
and he
remember
didn't know how
reading
to
it.
enunciate. And he really had to work with Lloyd to get him out of who he had was to what he could become. And it just was earth shattering. And of course, we see what happened. But you also meet actors like Gene Hackman, I interviewed, or William Hurt, or Laura Linney, or James Gandolfini, talk about what they learned from their teachers. Because you meet people like John Strasberg or William Esper, many, or Marion Seldes, who also taught so many acting students up at Juilliard. So it's quite a fascinating. And Andre de Shields, one of our finest actors, was also is also an extraordinary not only actor but acting teacher. So I feel it's important that we get to know people like that.
And talking about the writing process, I'm always curious when I speak to writers. Do you write every day in the morning? Do you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and write for 3 hours, or what's your writing process?
Well, it's very different. It depends upon what the project is. For example, this is me as Harold Clurman in Let It Be Art. And when I actually was thinking of doing the show, because I had actually written a play, a full-length play about the group theater, which Clurman co-founded, and doing that for maybe 15 years at so many venues off Broadway, people said you should create your own solo show. And I thought, do a solo show as Harold Clurman. So I wrote to Stella Adler, and she wrote me back. And of course, if you have watched Stella Adler on YouTube, you know she was very grand and so extraordinary. And when you read what she wrote, she said, "Oh no, darling, nobody could play Harold Clurman." But then she wrote, "P.S. If you have to, go ahead." And so that gave me sort of permission. So I looked at my notes when I was with him and I wrote down and I read all of his books because he wrote some of the most important drama books for theater that have ever been written on directing in the fervent years are must reads for everyone who loves theater. And so I did all this research and then I put it down and I said, okay, you are going to have to tell me what you want to say because this is you coming to life. And so I stopped and I listened and I waited and I listened and I began to hear what he wanted his life story to be told. And that's what you hear in Let It Be Art. The other process that sometimes happens, I mean, I'm also a poet and I've written quite a lot of poetry, and I never know when that will come. I'll be inspired by seeing three air balloons in the sky, or when I just, was in Greece recently, going to Olympia and being totally, surrounded by these extraordinary pillars from 2,000 years ago that speak to you, a poem arises. But I also, it comes through my dreams as well. And about maybe 10 or 12 years ago, in the middle of the night, I heard these words, and I always have paper and pencil next to my bed. And these words came through. and I heard them very distinctly. I wrote them down, and in the morning I looked at them, and it was Ibsen, Henrik Ibsen, the famous Norwegian playwright, talking to his wife, having a conversation. And then, oh, I never knew when this would happen. It only lasted 3 months, but a couple of weeks later, now I hear these words between 3 and 5 in the morning. Ibsen is talking to Hedda Gabler, one of the persons in her play. And then a week or two later, he's talking to Nora, from A Doll's House. And then his muse arrives. And I had no idea what this was until a director in India told me, and she read all of these scenes and vignettes, that this is not a play, this is an opera. You're going to have to learn how to write a libretto. Write a libretto? So it took me about a year of research to study how to write a libretto. She also introduced me to a very well-known German composer, Hartmut von Leers, who had never written an opera, but he wrote tons of music. And we got together. He's in India and Germany. I'm here. We corresponded for 10 years. We finished the opera, and now it's under consideration by 2 opera companies around the world. So you just never know what's going to happen.
And what's cool about that, so you had never written an opera or even
I had
thought
never written a libretto before, and it was meant to happen.
I'm learning from you, but I just have one problem who I'm learning is that, yeah, I love writing stuff down. Even as you're talking, I'm writing notes. But my problem, Ronald, I can't read my writing, So, no, in all seriousness, unless I type it now, so at 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't usually type. But it's a real problem because I have all these great ideas, but I can't read.
Well, if you have to get out of bed and start typing, turn on a little light and put it right next to the typewriter and write down what you actually heard and what you can remember of the dream, because your dreams will tell you so much that you cannot believe that your imagination could conceive. So I heartily recommend that.
And I want to thank you because now you're inspiring me to write my first opera. So after the show, I'll have a little pad and put it near my bed. And all the stuff you do, I'm fascinated by it. You have a favorite thing you do. In other words, let me ask you this before you even answer that question.
Sure.
I'm trying to think out loud how many different things you've done in your life, and you've done a lot,
Yes.
Like most people, an actor will do one thing, maybe some directing. But someday you should just make a list of all the different things you've done in your life. You probably have a list of about 27 different things, if not 43.
Well, I'm also an international acclaimed director. When I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Sarajevo as a Fulbright specialist, I was invited by the artistic director to actually. He came to me and he said, "We want to laugh in Sarajevo, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We need a comedy, and I understand that you direct." And I was there, and he invited me to direct at his famed Chamber 55 Theater, which was one of the most illustrious theaters in all of Bosnia. It's the equivalent of like one of the biggest off-Broadway theaters in America, but it's an incredibly important theater, very famous because it's the only theater that actually continued performances during their 15-year civil war.
Wow.
They had no electricity, no light, and people would come with candles and they would light them so the actors could act during the Civil War while it was continuing. So he invited me, and I actually directed a production of Murray Shishbul's play Love, which is the funniest comedy ever written, L-U-V, Love.
I know. So when you do directing that, though, was that in English?
No, it was in Bosnia, and I worked with 3 of the most famous Bosnian young actors. One was an international star, Zana Marjanovic. She was the star of Angelina Jolie's film In the Land of Blood and Honey. And I worked with these actors. They did it in Bosnian, but I understood everything they said because I had played one of the leads in a summer stock theater up in the New England. So I knew what they were saying. And I knew how to direct the show and bring out all the great humor. And it ran for 8 years. Every performance was sold out. And the only thing that shut it down was the pandemic.
Did you know Bosnian or you didn't have to know Bosnian?
No, I had an assistant next to me who had the script in Bosnian. I had my script in English, but I've directed down in Paysandú. I directed a production of Our Town in Spanish. When I was just in Greece, I conceived and came up with a performance called Living Roots. The university students spoke Greek, and they told me, they gave me the words that they were going to say in English, but they spoke in Greek. And then when I was over in actually in Malaysia, I also directed a small production, and it was amazing because they were, of course, speaking in Malay, but I knew how to work with them.
But as you're doing this, do you pick up any of these languages or bits and
Well,
pieces?
what I always do after a performance of Let It Be Art, I always do a curtain speech, and every speech is always phonetically in the language that I'm in. I could be speaking Thai, I could be speaking, it could be in Zulu, it could be in Spanish, in Greek, but I always make sure that I, in a sense, introduce myself to them. And also, I talk about what it means to actually share the healing art of theater, how important it is that because theater has the capacity to remind us to be human beings. And that's why I travel around the world for all these years as an international cultural ambassador. Because when I was at the National Theater in Nairobi, in Kenya, it was very, very important there because I was representing again the US. I've been to Russia several times. I've been to Belarus. I've been to countries like, it just depends where, in a sense, they invite me. Now in November, I've just been invited to represent the US at the International Theater Festival in Ankara, Turkey. So I'll be performing in Turkey.
Out of all the things you do, you have one favorite thing.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. My favorite thing is getting to know people. And the more that I'm able to share my gift and my light with others, and I'm able to learn from them, it becomes one of the most beautiful gifts we have on this planet because it's all about recognizing that we are all one people. And when I get to know someone like you, I get to know, someone in Sri Lanka, someone in Iceland, and I create these friendships and relationships. I'm still in touch with them from every country I've gone to. And it's the most beautiful thing. So that's what I truly enjoy the most, being able to create art and also be able to teach and at the same time learn from one another and realize that we have so much to give to each other.
And the final question, Ronald, has to do with you. And I'm curious, when do we get the Ronald Rand story? The movie, the opera, the show, the dance, the art. No, I'm serious about this. You're writing about all these people, all these interviews you've had. Are you ever going to write your story?
Well, in this book, actually in Solo Transformation on Stage, I
Right,
have a chapter about some of my travels and
right.
about what has happened to me on some of the extraordinary trips I've gone on. For example, when I was in a country like Zimbabwe and I did my performance, of course, Harold Clurman comes and he is living. And then at the end of the show, I speak in my own voice. And of course, I introduce myself. Well, at that moment, and this is what happens sometimes. I never know what will happen because, of course, it's all live. Actually, some young men stood up and started really shouting, I didn't know what was going to happen. And one young woman stood up and she said, "Actually, they think that you are now have been taken over by a spirit, and they're frightened and scared." And I tried to explain to them, no, this is the real me. And I was bringing to life someone named Harold Clurman, and they could not understand that because they are, of course, an Akiro. The spirit that enters is very powerful. And here they were meeting, and it's most amazing thing to have these kinds of experiences all over the world.
And keep in mind what I just threw out to you at the end. I'd love to have the experience of reading, but we talked about them in this brief half hour or so, but to read about all these experiences, the only problem I'm thinking, Ronald, we need like about 900 pages though, where we'd have to do an Asimov, Asimov, I loved it. I loved Asimov. I wanted to read his autobiography. I'd like to read your autobiography. And I knew
Well,
it was in
thank you.
trouble. I knew it was in trouble, Ronald, when it was like 3 volumes,
Mm-hmm.
and the first volume was 900 pages up until the age of 16, you know. So I loved Asimov, but I didn't want to read, and no offense to you, I don't want to read about, 900 pages
Well,
of your
I'm at
experiences.
the early part of my career. I've just begun. I have eons to go. I mean, after all, there are so many more countries in the world to travel, and so many more beautiful human beings to share the joy and the art of living and of love and of life. So it'll take a little time till I'll get there.
Okay, well, look forward to it. Ronald, just to recap, if folks want to track you down or find out more about you, the one-man show you're going to be doing at Black Mountain, the other stuff you're
Yes.
doing, what's the best bet?
They can go to my website, which is www.letitbeart.com. And they can also go to my newspaper at soulamericanactor.com. But of course, once we get closer there in 2025, naturally it'll be I'm sure in the newspapers, and I'll probably be doing some interviews around. So word will get out. And I'll
Okay.
also be doing my Art of Transformation workshop. I just did it a week ago. I'm going to be having another one coming up, and that'll also be in the newspapers as well.
Well, anyway, Ronald, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World webcast. I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti, and I look forward to meeting you. I have it down in April, if not before. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. A pleasure. Thanks.